Welcome to AINdebrief, where we take a look back at the most important aviation stories of the past week by the AIN editors who covered them. I'm AIN Alerts editor Chad Troutvetter. In this week's episode, Air Transport editor Gregory Polek explains Boeing's decision to move all 787 production to Charleston, South Carolina. He also talks about what it means for the 737 MAX recertification effort now that FAA Administrator Steve Dickson has flown a revamped airplane. Senior editor Kerry Lynch discusses the management shakeup at Bombardier that saw the departure of David Coleal on Thursday. And editor-in-chief Matt Thurber gives his take on a new Garmin D2 Air smartwatch that he's been testing this week. All right, so Greg, this week Boeing announced that they're moving all 787 production down to South Carolina. So why did they make that decision?
Well, there's been a dwindling demand for wide bodies for a while now, Chad, and even before the COVID situation took hold. Boeing had announced that there would be some cuts to 787 production overall. At one time, they were building 14 a month, and then they lowered their projection down to 12 at one time. Then it went to 10. Then it went to 7, and now it's 6. At 6 airplanes a month, there's no reason to have 2 factories running. At least the 2 that they have. So they've decided to go to South Carolina, to Charleston, where they opened this factory in 2010 or 2011. There's been a lot of speculation about why they chose Charleston, and it's pretty clear though that because Charleston builds the fuselage sections for these or assembles them and ships them via Dreamlifter to Everett for the 787-8 and 9. And not the 10. The 10 is built in South Carolina because you can't fit those fuselage sections in the Dreamlifter. South Carolina is the only place they could build all 3 models. So it really made a lot of sense to go down there. A lot of people believe they opened the site down there in South Carolina to begin with because it's a non-union. It's a right-to-work state. It's still a non-union shop down there. So it all basically came together, and they just made a lot of sense to move everything down there at this point. Didn't go over well in Washington, of course, and the politicians there are up in arms, and they're going to be, I think Governor Inslee has talked about taking away some of the tax breaks that they had given to Boeing. As part of their effort a while ago to keep 777 wing production up there. So that's about it right now. That's what I have, Chad.
So what's the timeline for this? And, Boeing's also closing the 747 line, so they're going to have a lot of extra capacity up in Everett. Does that mean layoffs coming, or does that mean that possibly they might look to go to do a new model? What's your sense of what Boeing might do here?
That's a good question. They're saying mid-2021 is when they're going to make the transition down to South Carolina, or that's their target. It will leave a lot of space. Probably half of the area in that building up in Everett, which is the largest freestanding building in the world, in terms of, I think, cubic feet or square feet. There's going to be a lot of space left there, and there will be obviously you're going to be jobs lost. But the question now is, what are they going to do with all that space up there? They, of course, build the 737 in Renton, Washington, closer to Seattle. And I guess there's been some talk about them potentially moving 737 production to Everett in order to take advantage of or to fill that space up there, and then possibly close Renton. But again, that's all speculation. Boeing has not even alluded to doing that, so we'll see.
Well, let's stay on the 737 topic. On Wednesday this week, the FAA Administrator flew the Boeing 737 MAX as part of the recertification effort. So what does that mean? Is this symbolic, or is it actually a real thing, vote of confidence by the Administrator?
Steve Dickson had said all along that he would personally fly the airplane before allowing it to fly in service or gain its certification. The there's been a lot of speculation about when he was going to do it, and it took quite a while. But now that he has, it appears that the airplane is indeed getting close to certification. There was a press event after the flight, and he kind of gave it his seal, or not seal of approval, but the thumbs up in a way. Was very upbeat about how the airplane performed. But of course, there are some detractors, and particularly from some family members of the victims of the twin plane crashes that resulted in the death of about 300 of exactly 346 people. The one individual, Michael Stumo, who was the father of Samia Rose Stumo, one of the people killed, has basically come out and said that this is just a public relations stunt on behalf of Boeing by the FAA, and it just proves that they're still a little too cozy, or a lot cozy, And he's saying that they should there should be really an independent look or examination of the test data, and that he's actually calling it secret data, and that the airplane shouldn't go back into service until there is this independent review.
EASA is going to be looking at this separately. So would that serve as a separate, independent review from the FAA?
That's a good point, and that's true. And Transport Canada and the Brazilians as well. Yeah, I mean, I guess a lot of this has to do with a lot of emotions being involved, and a lot of distrust in the FAA and the government in general. And we'll see what happens. But it looks though that the airplane will be ready to go back into service by the end of the year, and that's obviously good news for Boeing.
Yeah, it sure is. They could use some good news. So, Kerry, let's go over to you. On Thursday, late Thursday, actually, Bombardier announced the departure of David Coleal, who's been heading the aviation division for the past year, but for the previous 4 years to that was heading the business aviation division. So what does this mean for Bombardier? Why'd they do this?
Well, when Eric Martel returned to Bombardier in this past spring, the writing was on the wall that there were going to be changes, because at the time, Bombardier had made a series of agreements to sell off everything but their business aviation division. They were selling off their rail and the CRJ. They'd already done the C series and their aerostructures. It was just done in a series of pieces. And the only piece left coming up really is the rail. They've pretty much nailed down most of the rest of it. And so when Eric Martel came back, now you've got a situation where you have two presidents for one division. So, the writing was on the wall that either Eric Martel was only back to see the transition through, or David Coleal probably would be left out. And, there's a lot of other overstructure that comes with a corporation that has, multiple divisions, and you have people overseeing them, that, this may not be the end of it. That there may be a series of other decisions along those lines made as it becomes solely a one niche, if you will, company, and that's focused on business aviation.
So both have backgrounds where they left Bombardier and returned. So, and also David Coleal took over the business aviation division from Eric Martel. So what's the background of how all that kind of fits in?
Yeah, Chad, there's some really interesting dynamics with it, I think, as far as the handoff and when they came in. And let's go back to when Coleal first stepped in, I think it was around 2008, the late 2000s, right before he stepped in the first time, or was there the first time. I believe they had introduced the Learjet 85, which became a very expensive program for Bombardier. Now, Coleal, his tenure there was only a certain amount of time, and then he left. Well, he was ahead of Learjet at that time, and he first joined in 2008. The Learjet 85 was introduced in 2007. And then Coleal, after a few years, left and went on to Spirit Aerosystems. And Eric Martel stepped in and ran the division. And under Martel, the Learjet 85 rolled along, and they also had the Global 7000 program that they were trying to develop. And all this was in the backdrop where Bombardier was trying to develop the C Series. So they were investing vast amount of money in the Learjet 85, the Global program, as well as the C Series. And it nearly sunk the entire company. And as a matter of fact, it's probably what propelled the breakup of the company. So in 2015, Eric Martel leaves to go on to be CEO of, I believe it was Hydro Quebec, and Coleal comes back to run all of business aviation, not just Learjet. And when he comes back, the first two things he's faced with is canceling the Learjet 85 program and delaying by a couple years what was then the Global 7000 program. So they were pretty decisive actions that Coleal faced the minute Martel left, as these programs had been plodding along. And while Coleal was there, after making those actions, things started to really pick up and turn around from Bombardier. And in fact, the Global 7000 turned into the 7500, and it came to fruition. Now, that's not to say this was all Coleal's doing. I mean, obviously, it was a very strong program under Martel. There were just some issues, particularly with the wing, that had pushed it off. And so Coleal, however, was able to not only see that program through, and he also introduced the Global 5500, 6500, the next generation of the Global 5000, 6000 programs. And that's been a pretty good success for them. And not only did he introduce them, but those aircraft have been certified and they're both in service now. So Coleal's been able to get these programs out the door. The sales have been solid, although with the pandemic, who knows how much it's hurt them. They were talking somewhere in the terms of like 30% dips, but we'll see how that plays out over time. Now with Martel coming back, there's really no room for the both of them, and obviously Martel was the senior person in the corporate structure, so Coleal had to leave. And I don't think it was necessarily a fact that they were unhappy with Coleal. There just probably wasn't room for him. But the fact that the Learjet 85 was introduced before Coleal came and then canceled after he returned, it makes me wonder if some of this might have ramifications, not for the 85, because that had some problems in of itself, but for Learjet of itself. I mean, Coleal has been very strong all along that there's not going to be a new Learjet. We're going to support Learjet. We like the company. We like the service tail that brings in solid business. But, with the pandemic, what's happened is small aircraft now have become the darlings of the industry again. So who knows? Maybe there will be some ramifications there.
So maybe this will be good for Learjet.
Maybe. I mean, nobody has indicated that to me, and that's a shot in the dark, but maybe.
Well, I think it's valid speculation. With a new guy coming in, you just never know what they're going to do. And if the light end of the market is doing better, then obviously the company will have to invest in that.
Right. So, we'll see.
Okay. So also this week, Garmin unveiled its new D2 Air watch. Matt, you actually got one. So you've been playing with it. So what's it like?
Chad, the new Garmin D2 Air smartwatch is actually my favorite one of the series so far. The big difference now is that it has an AMOLED touchscreen, and the previous watches, which are all a lot more expensive, have the user interface is strictly buttons and knobs, and you have like four different push buttons and a knurled knob on the older ones. And while they were powerful watches that did a lot, I just found that trying to remember which button to push when was a little bit of a burden. But the new D2 Air makes it so much simpler because you can do a lot just with the touch screen itself.
Yeah, and it has most of the features of the higher end watches with all the knobs, right?
Exactly. The only difference I've seen so far is that the D2 Air has it doesn't have the moving map display on the screen. Actually, another difference is you can't see the radar weather either. But these are, it's not a really super important feature, and you can still do all the navigation and tracking and all that during a flight because it's got a built-in GPS. And at $499, it's a pretty reasonably priced unit.
So what features does it have other than the ones you just mentioned?
So another thing it has that only recently was introduced on the more expensive watches is a pulse oximeter. And for $499, a watch with a pulse oximeter is also a pretty good deal. The other features include aviation weather. You can get METARs, terminal forecasts. It's got navigation with direct to and nearest functions. You can transfer flight plans from the Garmin Pilot app, and then it'll navigate using an HSI display to show you where you're going. It's got flight logging, and it's got all of the Garmin activity features, so you can track all your health statistics, including the oxygen levels now, and running, swimming, biking, any kind of activity, snowboarding.
So is the watch available now, or is it going to be shipping in the fourth quarter?
No, Garmin usually doesn't announce these things till they're available, so it is available now. And it also, you can do Garmin Pay with it. You can play music, and like most smartwatches, it has a really robust set of notifications. The one thing that I really like about it, though, is that you can display an analog watch face with a local time on it, and then you can select a different time to display in the digital indicator of time, and you can set it to 12 or 24. So I've got the local time on analog, and then I've got coordinated universal time or Zulu time on the digital in a 24-hour format. So it makes figuring out the times of terminal forecasts much, much easier. It's a pretty impressive unit, and it has really good battery life too. It'll last for up to 5 days unless you're using the GPS and the pulse oximeter constantly. In that case, it's about 10 hours. And even though the bezel size is just over 42 millimeters, I think, especially without all the big buttons hanging off the side, it looks a little more elegant, and I think it'll be more attractive to not just male pilots, but also female pilots.
Excellent. Thanks, Matt. Thanks for listening to AINdebrief. Another podcast episode will air next Friday. In the meantime, go to www.ainonline.com for the latest aviation news from AIN.